Hello world. In this video I'm going to be offering you my thoughts on the 2023 versions of these two albums, 62 to 66, the Red album, 67 to 70, the Blue album. They've just been re-released as 2023 editions in the last couple of weeks or so. I don't have physical copies of them, I'm afraid. The vinyl albums are £75 a piece. They've been extended, so I think they're triple albums or something, but even so, 75 quid at this time of year is not really the best use of it per album. So, you know, I've used the Apple Music versions and my wireless AirPods to review the album on. I'm going to apologise now. It's dark. I have no way of getting it any brighter in here. It's really going to hammer down with rain at any time soon, all right? And I don't have much light, so you might just have to close your eyes and not look at me or something. Just listen to what I've got to say, which is going to be quite informative, I hope. So originally, these two albums were released in 1973, when really all that was on the market were stereo versions of the UK Beatles albums. I mean, I'm talking about in the UK here, all right? So there were stereo versions of the UK Beatles albums. The singles were still in print. The bootleggers wanted to make an album that contained lots of the singles. Alan Klein, who was head of Apple at that time, you didn't anger Alan Klein, and he was getting wind of these bootleggers. Bootlegging as in making unofficial and unauthorised versions of albums had only just become a thing in the late 60s. Alan Klein was getting wind of it, wasn't having any of it, but he did at least relent and decide to make two compilation albums, the Blue and Red albums, with most of the singles, the occasional B-side, and also just a handful of the really popular album tracks. And that stayed off the bootleggers for a little while, kept them quiet, kept them in the background, as it were. They sold like hotcakes. In the 80s, the late 80s, they were deleted when the CDs came out because they had a far more acceptable solution, I think, in the 80s, and that was to release all the UK albums plus Past Masters Volume 1 and Past Masters Volume 2 on CD. And if you had all of those, then you had every single song that the Beatles ever wanted you to have in their lifetime as a group. In 93, the Red and Blue were released again. They're like, you know, that box of Brazil nuts that you just can't get rid of. You know, you give it to a raffle and your mate wins it and wraps it up and gives it back to you for Christmas. That kind of thing. So yeah, they came back. The Red album was pretty good because it had new stereo versions of CD mixes that had only hitherto been released in mono. So those first four albums from 63 and 64 were only released in mono on CD in the 80s, and they had a handful of tracks that had got new stereo mixes for the CD versions. Then they were re-released as 2009 mixes in 2009, Quelle Surprise, and now we have the 2023 versions that have been revised and expanded. Now, I'm going to stick my guts out and say, right, well, if you only had 75 quid and you had to buy a Red or a Blue album, or you die, get the Red one. Because at least with that, in the same way as it was where the first digital stereos of the mono albums came out, this is where we're getting the first AI tracks, proper stereo mixes of songs that really sounded awful in stereo, those 63, 64 things where all of the vocals are on the left and on the right. Well, actually, it was only the first two albums, 63, Please Please Me and With the Beatles, that contained those left and right mixes, plus a handful of the singles. As I say, I haven't got them. I've been listening on my AirPods on Apple Music, where they're all there for you to hear and for you to make up your own mind about, but I'm just going to give you my opinions on most of the tracks on the Red album and some of them on the Blue album, and it'll become apparent why I'm not doing all of them. Alright, so Love Me Do is the 2023 mix. It's from Ringo Starr's version of this. Now, Ringo Starr's version of Love Me Do, as opposed to Andy White playing the drums and Ringo playing tambourine, which was the mainstream single and has been on all of the albums up until sort of fairly recently, really, has a master tape, but the one with just Ringo on drums, there's no master for it. It's just a single. There, in the 80s, a couple of fans found that they had versions of it. It was released for a couple of days until in 63 they realised their mistake, withdrew it and put out the new one. All right, so it's a vintage recording. It doesn't sound very good. It sounds like, even with this new AI technology thing, it doesn't work very well on pure mono. And it just sounds like someone's pressed the stereo wide button that you used to have on your boombox. It's not particularly good. Please Please Me is the stereo version that's been AI'd here. Now, the stereo version originally was a different take to the mono version. The different take had backing vocals where nobody seems to quite remember exactly what the backing vocals were. So you can hear quite a few clashes where the lead vocal sings something different from the backing vocal. Also, the stereo backing track doesn't have any harmonica on it. So they simply took the mono mix and synced up the mix so that wherever there was harmonica, they just played a little bit of that in. It didn't quite work. By the time they got to the end of the track, it was quite seriously out of sync. People have put up with it for the last 50 odd years, 60 years in fact. Here, they've tried to remedy at least the end of it. It does go a little bit spacey towards the end, but then they fade out the harmonica and it appears to sort of, the last couple of notes of it appear to have been cut off quite abruptly. But there you go. It's a bit sort of more spaced out. It works a little bit better. All right. I saw Her Standing There and Twist and Shout lack the immediacy of the ordinary analog mono versions. If you want to hear the Please Please Me album, folks, just buy a mono version of it, preferably on vinyl. But, if you can find an 80s CD mono of it, then that's good as well, really. There's a beautiful acoustic, which just works so well in mono, especially with any of their falsetto vocals, that it's just to die for. And it's the only album that really appears to have it. But it's a really vintagey kind of, I suppose, 50s-y style EQ, not EQ, reverb setting, and it's just gorgeous. And that seems to have gone here. Because of the AI thing, it sounds a bit spacey, a bit spaced out kind of thing as well. It works. The stereo positions are better, far better than the stereo versions up till now. All instruments on the left, vocals on the right. Just that it so nearly works, but I don't think it does quite. Right? It would be very interesting to see if and when they do release an AI'd version of Please Please Me, whether or not they tweak these mixes at all. Right, quick elephant in the room. I've just said I Saw Her Standing There and Twist and Shout. These were not included on the original Red album. I think they're putting a few on from each of these earlier albums, a few extra tracks, just to try and tease us, as it were, just to try and make it worth our while re-buying these things again, when, as I say, I've given you a potted history of them. This version, I think, is at least version 4 of it, and they've got to give you some kind of incentive to buy it. Well, how about hearing the new AI mixes? That premise falls when we get to the Blue album, as you'll see. I really think that rather than giving us some of these extra album tracks, I would rather wait till the proper albums came out. If they wanted to expand it at all, what about giving us some of those B-sides? Thank You Girl, for example, which we've never seen before, as an AI version, would be quite good, and would also help to fill in gaps in the modern Beatles buyers collection. But anyway, we've got I Saw Her Standing There and Twist and Shout. From Me to You and She Loves You, 2 singles here. From Me to You has had the harmonica restored in this stereo AI version. The first time it was released in stereo was for a 1966 compilation, 3 years after the single, and they forgot to put the harmonica at the beginning. That was the collection of oldies but goldies. Sounds one heck of a lot better. There's an awful lot wrong with that oldies but goldies version. Really does not sound very nice at all, and it was that version that was then put onto the Red album in 73. In 1993 for the CD it was improved, but this is far better, and at least it sounds as it should have sounded with the harmonica at the beginning. She Loves You sounds good. It's better than the number 1 mix. Anything's better than the number 1 mix from 2015. Again, far better than, because this was one where the masters were lost, and so once it was released as mono for the single, that twin track tape was lost, and so even in 1966, when they had to put this oldies but goldies compilation together, they could only ever make a fake stereo version of it. And it's been released in fake stereo and in mono really ever since. And this is a nice stereo version of it. Not perfect. There are quite a lot of edits in the original. Usually wherever that sort of twiddle of a guitar that George played, that little bit there that sort of leads you between the verses and the choruses, and you can hear them sort of these sort of splices going on at those points. Have a look at the anomalies list for details. It's not quite as obvious here, and I think they've done good with it, compared to how badly they've done with Love Me Do so far. But again, with Love Me Do, we're lucky to have that Ringo mix, and I'd rather have that than not have it. I Want to Hold Your Hand has the honour of being the first 4-track recording that the Beatles made. It sounds pretty good in stereo anyway. Here, it just sounds good in stereo. Now, this boy is, again, it's all the vocals on the right, all the instruments on the left, apart from a little bit of overdubbing of the introduction, which appears to come in the centre because it's just been overdubbed. It sounds really good in this new mix. Vocals nicely centred. Some, again, you're not going to achieve absolute miracles. You're not going to have completely separate instruments, but at least they sort of couch those vocals so that you've got some on the right and some on the left. There's a bit in the middle 8 where John does some double tracking, which just seems to come out of nowhere on the left track in the original stereo. It's much more integrated here. A good job. The next songs come from the With the Beatles album. Again, you've got more songs from the With the Beatles album than you had originally on this Red album, and the proviso is, for me, I would much rather have waited till With the Beatles came out. All right, this is, it's too much of a teaser. It makes this compilation too unwieldy, particularly if you are getting it on CD, where I think it's a double, and on vinyl, where I think it's a triple. I very, very rarely play triple albums. I haven't even played my All Things Must Pass for many years. It's just too much aggro. I'm lazy. Anywho, we next have then All My Loving, Roll Over Beethoven, and You Really Got a Hold on Me, which sound brilliant, given that they were recorded in more or less the same way as Please Please Me, except maybe with a few extra overdubs in places. Some of these go down to sort of third and fourth generation twin track stereo tapes with overdubs on them. They've done a really good job. They don't ruin the acoustic in the way that the Please Please Me tracks, I fear, do somewhat. And I think you just forget that you're listening to this AI thing, and you just go back to enjoying the music, which is what you should be doing in the first place. Can't Buy Me Love, You Can't Do That, A Hard Day's Night, and I Love Her all come from the Hard Day's Night album. Now, I had a bit of a shock, really, because I thought I'll do a compare and contrast with A Hard Day's Night from the 2009 stereo and this new stereo version. And while the stereo positions aren't wildly different, because this was recorded on 4-track, and the stereo, the original stereos from the 60s here are acceptable. They're good. They might not be definitive. Still, the mono was the definitive thing. It should still be your go-to, but these are good. And the 2009, the lead vocal of A Hard Day's Night is awful. It's really limited and compressed. You can hear it pumping, going up and down, and it's really not a very pleasant thing, especially listening on headphones. It's bright and breezy in this new 2023 mix. It gives you a good estimation, I suppose, of the energy that is in that mono mix and the power of it, but in stereo, which is what it always should have been. And as I say, You Can't Do That and I Love Her and Can't Buy Me Love, they're just great anyway. All right, not wildly different from the original 60s stereo mix, but just clearer. 8 Days a Week deserves a special mention. The Hold Me, Love Me backing vocals are to die for here. Yeah, you are aware that the vocals thicken up somewhat in the original stereos, which is a good original stereo, but here it's just a bit more still. It really sort of grabs you by the short and curlies when you suddenly hear Hold Me, Love Me, and with those overlaid, overdubbed vocals on there that sound really, really good. I Feel Fine is great. Again, that would have been a single, would have only been released in mono up until 1966 when it was on that Oldies But Goldies album, and this is a really good stomping stereo version. Very, very good indeed. Ticket to Ride, I don't know, the Help album, the new 2009 Help album, as it were, is quite bright and breezy and airy, and also quite detailed. Ticket to Ride, in its original iterations from the 60s, had problems with the bass. They were really dull as dishwater, really, down in the bass. No kind of definition whatsoever going on down there. It's far better on the 2009. The stereo was overly bright with no bass in the 60s. The bass had been improved for the 2009 mix, and here it's the same improved bass, but just a warmer balance overall. Yesterday, nice and lush, gorgeous. Seems to be a bit more spread out. The reverb that's on the mono is not quite the same here, but it is more reverberant than the original stereo mix of that. Help, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, similar comments really. The stereo was always overly bright. The mono mix was terrible when it was first pressed for this Help album. The new, as I say, quite new anyway, mono box set from 2014. I keep thinking it's either 2012 or 2014. I think it's 2014 mono box set is a much better mono pressing, much better mono pressing. All right, but you know, similar to Ticket to Ride and Yesterday, the warmth is there from the mono with, you know, the incisive character of all this, you know, this sort of new stereo AI, newfangled whatchamacallity tomfoolery that's going on here. So then we get to We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper, and I can't work this one out at all. But we're back to vocals on the right for both tracks, instruments mainly on the left with the odd bit here and there sort of joining us on the right. And I don't seem to see much difference at all between that and the original stereos. Things do improve considerably for the rubber soul tracks on here, which are Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, Michelle and In My Life, and If I Needed Someone, and Girl. Great big handful of rubber soul here, which makes me think that that's going to be the next album that gets this AI treatment, and the one that we're going to sort of be seeing in the next year or so. All of these mixes are absolutely excellent. Compared to how they were, George Martin could have done a far more normal stereo mix with vocals in the centre and a few instruments scattered around left and right, as you know he'd done for Sale and for Help and for Hard Day's Night. He just didn't. He wanted to make something that would sound big on these gramophone things that had, you know, just huge pieces of furniture with a speaker either side. He didn't really quite succeed. Here, they've been sort of more normalised. Vocals in the centre and instruments all around, as you would hopefully expect. And they sound good. They sound really good. Special mention for If I Needed Someone, which now has this absolutely gorgeous vocal and that sort of Birds style guitar mix. It sounds like it's been enhanced somehow so that it's more jangly, more Birds-esque. The Beatles could never quite do it because they were never quite allowed to turn up the treble and abuse the equipment the way that they did in these American studios. Nowhere Man also sounds fantastic. The a cappella choir bit all on the right in the original just doesn't sound good, and then you've got all of the other instruments coming in somewhere over on the left and maybe the odd one or two in the centre. No, it doesn't sound good. Here, at least we haven't got too much separation going on in the choir vocals, but at least they're in the centre. At least we then have some instruments on the right, some on the left, some in the centre, nicely in the centre. Again, there's a lovely warmth about this. You know, it really does sound like you've taken a record and put it on a record player with, you know, perhaps, you know, the way that those, you know, the best stereo cartridges sounded in the 60s. There were, believe it or not, some good stereo cartridges in the 60s. They weren't all these plasticky things that are still being made for $2 a piece in China. And then I'm going to leave the rest of this Red album because I've already given very detailed thoughts on all of the 1966 songs that have come off Revolver, which finish off this album, in a video beforehand. I might put a link to it somewhere, or I might chuck it in a playlist or something. So that you can hear it. All right, because I did a We've Got It, So What Do I Think, and I also did a mix shootout. I'd recommend the mix shootout. Not many people have watched it, and I need a few people to watch it. So yeah, going on to the Blue album. The reason I'm not going to talk about many songs from here is because they've been released before. Most of them in iterations pre this AI technology. It's the AI technology which is making these sound quite as good as they sound. Yes, the 2015 Strawberry Fields sounds good, and the 2017 Sgt. Pepper sounds okay-ish, and again we've got this 2018 White Album which is good, and the Abbey Road album which is also good, but none of which really is any better. They're different. They don't really make much of an improvement on the original stereo mixes. It's the AI thing where you're actually able to sort of delve into the detail of the mixes, and there are only a handful of songs on here that haven't been released before and have new 2023 mixes. So it's going to be those that I'm going to deal with, and then I might make a few comments about now and then at the end as well. So the first thing is that we're going to nip over to the Magical Mystery Tour thing, which hasn't had any kind of remixing treatment to it, apart from Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. Oh, and All You Need Is Love, that got a 2015 mix as well. So, looking at I Am the Walrus, out of all of the maybe 60 or 70 songs that we've got on both of these albums, it is I Am the Walrus which really stands out to me, as they've done this AI thing, and by golly does it sound different. So what's different about it? First of all, those strings are on the right hand side now, and they sound really separate, really detailed. There's a lot more gliding and glissandos going up and down on those strings and cellos than you perhaps thought were there. The choir has now been separated from the rest of the orchestra. The brass sounds separate from the strings. John's vocal, it's a bit like, I suppose, Norwegian Wood, which I should have mentioned before. You know, it is so clear. It is so incisive, and it's just incredible. Absolutely incredible. I was really interested to hear what happens when it goes into fake stereo. Now, if you watch the Magical Mystery Tour film, which does have a stereo soundtrack, when you get to I Am the Walrus, yeah, there's dialogue and other stuff sort of going on around it and everything, but sort of listening through it, you can hear that it does actually sound like it's in full stereo, and not that sort of way where we get to sitting in an English garden and then the whole thing shifts over from one side to the other, and so it just comes out of one channel and gives you a nosebleed. On the new 2023 mix, you still get that kind of feeling. Your right ear does go dead for a second. I think they could probably have kept it in stereo if they wanted to, but I think they wanted to still pay homage to the fact that the thing was going into fake stereo, but sort of trying to make it less severe, so it does kind of sound a bit stereo, but not quite, if you see what I mean. When we get to the fade out, those radio sounds and the choir and the Shakespeare and the tuning in, and there's bits of orchestra that you didn't even realise were there, that as they're tuning in, it's obviously sort of going through, you know, some classical music passage or something, and that comes up, and it's just completely different fade out from how we used to it. And you know, it's a good minute or so of this completely new take on what that fade out was like. So it is the most stark remix, I believe, than there has been so far. But yeah, The Fool on the Hill gets a 2023 mix. It's nice. I couldn't really tell you in great detail what's different about it, except that it does end rather abruptly. Magical Mystery Tour sounds far more integrated. The stereo mix of that has always been rather dodgy and, dare I say it, crap. Sorry, George Martin, 1967 and all. We are supposed to bow down to you, but the stereo mix of Magical Mystery Tour was never very good. Neither was the American mono version of it. So this is, I suppose, the best that we've had so far. The only disappointing thing is that that coach that travels across from one side to the other, skids, crashes, doesn't appear to be as obvious. It is very obvious in the old mixes, but here it's been dumbed down a little bit. Also, though, we have got this very interesting guitar playing on the right hand side, quite rock and roll and whatever, that had been buried in the mix before, and it's now quite to the fore. So listen out on the right hand side, because that's a really good piece of guitar. It's a far better mix. Revolution, it does sound different. Again, I'm hard pressed to tell you what the differences are. I tend to think that perhaps it didn't need this new AI treatment. The drums seem to be a bit isolated over on the left, but hey ho. Hey Bulldog, fantastic. If you got a group of 2020s wannabes, they could do far worse than have written Hey Bulldog themselves and presented it in this way that it's been presented here. Sounds very modern, very up to date, very upbeat. And then we have Old Brown Shoe, which is just good stereo, but it was good stereo in the first place. But it's just, as I say, it's crisper, it's more incisive, and then the rest of them are just songs that we've had before. Quite why we've got a full 7 minutes and 47 seconds of I Want You, She's So Heavy. Quite why there's so much of Abbey Road on here. I think it's a bit excessive. Now and then, I suppose, because I haven't before, I need to offer my comments on this. It's a nice, pleasant song. I like it. Can we get that out of the way? I like it. Because I'm a cynic, I think that, again, this is like that box of Brazil nuts that you can't give away. Somehow or other, you will always get it back. John Lennon sat with his cassette recorder on his piano, the way lots of us did in the 70s and 80s, composing, while he was sort of having a bit of a hiatus from recording and stuff. But maybe one afternoon in 76, he decided, perhaps I'll try and write a song. I've put Sean in the nursery. He's happily playing. I'll try and write a song here. He had quite a good boombox at the time, but it had built-in microphones, which just also record a lot of the inner workings of the cassette machine, the motors and whatnot. So this piano and vocal track, again all mono, had a considerable amount of hum and unwanted other noises with it. And in the 90s, when Ringo, George and Paul got together to do Anthology and do Free as a Bird and Real Love, they had a go at doing Now and Then, but it wasn't good enough. And George used the F word to make his feelings known that actually it was crap. John could have recorded Now and Then. He could have made a better version of it. If he liked it, he could have then taken that to whatever studios he was in New York City in 1979 and 80, when he was recording Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey. He could have thought, perhaps I'll at least make a decent demo of this. but he didn't. Probably because, you know, he'd either A, completely forgotten that he'd done it, which doesn't sound unlike John, but probably he didn't really want it. He didn't really like it. And so he didn't. And I would argue that it's the same with Real Love and Free as a Bird. Although Real Love, I think, is probably the best out of the three of those. Now, I really like Real Love, to be honest. George Harrison, as I say, you know, they got through doing this in the mid-90s and he said it's crap, and abruptly, you know, just said, right, don't want to do it anymore. They'd done the other two, don't want to do this one, they didn't do it. And it suddenly resurfaced again as part of this, you know, big AI project that they've been doing with the Beatles for the last few years, since the Let It Be film, whatever. And Paul McCartney has said, right, well, I wonder if we could have another shot at it. And then said it's a tribute to George and John. John, who, for whatever reason, didn't like it, didn't record it. George, who said it's crap. And so Paul and Ringo have to do it as a tribute to George and John. So what does that really say? I mean, I know it's all supposed to be sentimental. John would be, and Paul said, oh, John would really like it. He'd really like this AI technology. He was really into that. But John wouldn't have had to. If he'd liked the song, it's the song in the first place. And yet they've sped it up. They've cut out a middle eight that was there in the demo but isn't anymore, as it were. They've added strings and stuff on it like that, but I can just imagine, you know, it was a very pleasant experience hearing it this morning. But I can imagine John saying, oh God, you didn't find this one, did you? I thought I got rid of this one. I don't think that it's necessarily his best moment. I think that any of the songs that he wrote for Double Fantasy, and even some of the songs that Yoko wrote for Double Fantasy, are better than Now and Then. Just an opinion. It's great that it puts the Beatles back on the agenda and everything for a new generation and whatnot. But it is what it is. It is what it is. And I suppose with me, I think that most of my grumpiness about it is just down to the sadness that we haven't got John and George anymore. And, you know, we are, you know, looking, you know, I know it's grim and everything, but we're looking at the last few twilight years of Yoko, of Paul, and of Ringo. You know, I'm dreading the time when any of those three passes. You know, it's just, you know, it just makes me feel very wistful and, you know, quite sad for times gone by, really. It breaks my heart, really. Yeah, that's, I suppose, the whole reason for it. But anyway, those are my thoughts on these two albums. And I'll see you in the next video, whatever that happens to be. All right, remember to like, subscribe, share if you dare, watch some of my older videos, and I will see you again in the next one. Ta-ra!